Hello to everyone. On behalf of the International Finance Corporation, the IFC, the branch of the World Bank Group that focuses on supporting the development of the private sector in emerging markets, I welcome all the attendees to this webinar and hope that you and your families are well and in good health. Thanks for joining this hopefully interesting discussion. I am Carlos Serrano. I'm from IFC Mexico office, and I'm the program manager for IFC Green Banking Academy program. Our program provides financing, advisory, and knowledge sharing to the financial sector in Latin America as a way to accompany the transformational journey of banks from business as usual to sustainable and responsible banking. One of our main priorities is promoting climate finance to mitigate and adapt to the impact of climate change. This is the third webinar of the several that we have put together, and we will be held in the next weeks until the summer. And we have put it together under the title Ctrl+Alt+Delete Green Rebuild. What do we mean for that? Control means that we shall aim to take more control of the future of the world where we are all living and make it better for us and for our generations. Alt means that there are better alternatives to what we are doing today, where all we are living and make it better for us and our generations. Alt means that there are better alternatives to what we are doing today in many fields, and therefore we shall stop doing those ones that are not beneficial for the persons and for the planet. Delete means that it is in our hands to erase the mistakes of the past and work for a better future. So today we are proposing a full reboot. The building phase of this crisis, one the most acute emergencies over, offers us a fantastic opportunity for a green rebuild. The world is changing from economic, political, social, and business standpoints, and the sustainable economy represents a unique opportunity to rebuild a more dynamic, resilient, and competitive society. Let me mention now some logistics about this webinar. We are going to have a presentation for the next 25-30 minutes, followed by 10 or 15 minutes of question and answer. And you can post your questions in the question and answer section of the WebEx on the right side of your screen. I'm happy to introduce now our moderator for this webinar, Daniela Velandia. Daniela is an Associate Investment Officer at IFC. In this role, Daniela supports IFC climate finance investment and advisory work through financial markets in Latin America. Daniela joined the Young Professional Program of the World Bank Group in 2018, after completing her Master in Finance at Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for joining our webinar number 3, covered on the New World Order, Green Economic, the Great Opportunity. So before we start introducing our great speaker for today, I want to use this opportunity to invite you to stop and think for a second. Although the current situation is not ideal, because we're facing an unprecedented economic crisis around the world, for the first time in recent history, we're having the opportunity to stop, take a break, and actually think what we can do better and what we have done wrong. Unfortunately, funding is a constraint here. There is not enough money around the world to save all the companies that are having liquidity issues and financial problems. So, as was mentioned in our first webinar, COVID packages in developed markets reach around 10 to 12% of the GDP and around 2 to 3% in developing countries. Even though this is a major amount of money, it will not be sufficient. We won't be able to save all the existing companies that are having trouble, and especially many SMEs are going to face a major crisis. As such, we need to think wisely and strategically how to maximize this resource. And we need to leverage all the new opportunities that this reconstruction phase is going to offer to do things better. So having said this, let me introduce our honored guest today. Juan Verde is a leader strongly committed with sustainability. He's also an internationally renowned strategist for both the private and the public sector, designing innovative strategies to attract investments, accelerate economic development, and establish strategic alliances. He also specializes in economic sustainable development. Within the corporate sector, Mr. Verde has served as a consultant for a variety of companies such as Google, Cisco, SAS, Banco Santander. And he has also collaborated with institutions such as the World Bank Group, the Inter-America Development Bank, Harvard University, and obviously IFC. In the public sector, he has worked with governments of Lithuania, Gibraltar, and the United States, as well with different governments in Latin America. Mr. Verde was appointed by President Barack Obama as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe and Euro-Asia at the U.S. Department of Commerce, and he has worked with relevant political figures such as Bill Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, former Vice President Al Gore, the late Senator Ted Kennedy, and former Secretary of State John Kerry. With these opening remarks, I have the pleasure to introduce Juan Verde. Juan, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela. I appreciate your kind words. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for your valuable time today. I truly hope that you are able to take with you some useful insights from my remarks, and that those remarks will help you prepare better for the future that lies ahead, which is quite uncertain, but also full of opportunities. I also want to thank the IFC, particularly the Green Banking Academy, and of course, everyone who has worked so hard to make this event a reality. Carlos, thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you for your kind invitation to be part of this community and this series of talks. And I'd like to start with just a brief, but I think significant initial point on the importance of this crisis. And I truly believe that we are at a historic crossroads. I'm not going to come here and create the false expectation that everything is going to be fine and that everything will eventually go back to normal, or that nothing really important has happened. That's not what I plan to do today. The truth of the matter is that things will get worse, much worse actually, before they get better. I happen to think that this is an unprecedented crossroads for humanity and the global economy. In fact, I would argue that this crisis marks a tipping point, a sort of before and after. And hence, I truly believe that the world is and will continue to change drastically as a result of this pandemic. Things will change, as I mentioned, dramatically in ways that we can't even begin to comprehend now. I think that nothing will be the same, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. That's the kind of change that we're talking about. This, in my opinion, is the beginning of a new world order, and that's what I want to talk to you about. What will the world be like post-COVID-19? So on that note, I want to begin by sharing some ideas with you as to what are some of the lessons that can be learned from this horrible crisis, which I hope you will find of interest and you'll be able to take back to your own institutions and companies. We have to be able to learn from the past and learn from the mistakes that we have made. So I think that the first lesson, which is this slide, is that we need to prepare better. Now, the World Health Organization first published a report in 1999, right, which actually sent it to pretty much all the heads of states around the world. And it basically said that, one, we were not ready. Two, that we needed to do, excuse me, I want to make sure that we're on the right slide. So basically that report that was sent in back in 1999 said that a pandemic was coming, and that was pretty much inevitable. Number two, it said that we were not ready as a world community for it. And three, that we needed to begin working together, collaborating in order to be better prepared. Now, guess what? That same report was actually sent in different versions, but with the very same conclusions year after year between 1999 and 2020. So for 21 years, the heads of states from the entire world got that report. And yet here we are. We were caught not ready. And to a lot of people, it was a big surprise. You know, it's food for thought, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, imagine every single thing we would have been able to do differently had it not been, let me rephrase that. Wouldn't it be very different if we would have been told ahead of time when it was going to happen and how it was going to happen? It was going to begin in March. If we would have listened to the scientific community, I think all of us would have had our own contingency plans perfectly polished and ready. I think most of us would have had medical supplies ready, not just for our employees and our institutions, but even for our families, right? So why are we not thinking the same way about climate change? Coronavirus is the current, the present, and to some, the immediate danger. But the underlying huge menace, the big threat out there, it's climate change. It's as serious, if not more. And I think that the scientific community has been warning us, not for 21 years, but for over 30 years. They keep telling us what climate change is and how it's going to affect us. Every possible red warning light, it's there. And as tragic as it sounds, up until yesterday, about 435,000 people have lost their lives due to coronavirus. And that's horrible. Each and every one of those stories are dramas, and it's a horrible situation. But the World Bank estimates that in 2020, this year, air pollution alone will cause between 6 and 7 million premature deaths. And this is only going to get worse. The very same institution, the World Bank, and their experts foresee that by 2030, climate change will push an additional 100 million people into extreme poverty. This year alone, in addition to our very own problems with COVID-19 around the world, we should expect to have over 19 million climate refugees worldwide. So that's my very first takeaway lesson that I want to share with you. If we know climate change is already impacting us, if we know that this is a tangible and very direct threat, and if we know that the consequences will be catastrophic, then the question is, should we not probably prepare more and prepare better for the next crisis, which, by the way, I think is going to have everything to do with climate change? Now, the next slide is about the scientific community. And to me, it's a great lesson that we should think about. Because if there's anything positive or remotely helpful out of this terrible situation, is that we have reconfirmed our trust in science. And here we are once again, I think rightly so, listening to and perhaps even valuing more the scientific evidence in a positive manner. Tomorrow, after this crisis is over, it is my opinion that no world leader, at least not anyone in his right mind, is going to continue to make purely political decisions without listening to their scientific advisors. The rule of law today is very different. And I think that it's all about the study and analysis of objective data. And that's actually good news. I think that's great. We need to go back to appreciating and valuing knowledge and science. And if you're thinking about the world leaders like Donald Trump in the United States or Bolsonaro in Brazil, who, in my opinion, from early on did not want to listen to the science, I think that they're going to pay a huge political price for not having done it. And hence, I just don't see that happening in the future again. So that's my second lesson. Yes, the science is important, and we must make it a priority going forward. The next slide I want to share with you, it's about cooperation, or perhaps lack of. I think this slide has everything to do with whether we're going to be able to avoid the next crisis. It won't be easy to avoid it, but I think that to a great extent, it depends on whether or not, that's, you know, a parenthesis I have to insert in there, whether or not we're going to be capable of understanding that global problems need and require global solutions. If there's one lesson to be learned from this crisis, is that cooperation is the solution and never the problem. Because, you know, let's think about what are some of the most important global challenges affecting the world today, whether it's international terrorism, money laundering, illegal immigration, which is a huge crisis affecting so many countries around the world, or even climate change. Those are the real challenges of the future. And if we want real solutions to these problems, we have to understand that cooperation, or greater cooperation, is needed, and that we have to work together across cultures and across the world. That's the only way. A former boss of mine at the US Department of Commerce used to say about global threats, like pandemics or even climate change. He used to say, one, we have everything to gain if we work together and everything to lose if we don't. I happen to agree with him. And with climate change, for example, unlike with COVID-19, we can't simply close our borders down and hope that we don't get affected, or that the problem doesn't come into our borders. So yes, science is extremely important. Cooperation is extremely important. The same is true with our response to climate change and the climate emergency. We need to be more prepared, as I mentioned before. We need to listen to the scientists. We need to cooperate more. Because if we don't, then when the real crisis begins, and believe me, I think it will sooner rather than later, the consequences could be much worse than this current crisis. So those are the three takeaway lessons, in my opinion, that we should all be mindful of. Allow me now to speak for just a few minutes about how the world is going to change in different perspectives. Those changes are coming. I don't think they're subject to interpretation. Perhaps the how, but not the what. You know, a lot of people ask me, how do I think that COVID-19 will change the world? And I always answer in a very sort of short and sweet way. I always say, how is it going to change? What is it going to change? It's going to change everything. And it's going to change everything drastically. Nothing will be the same. In fact, I happen to believe that a new world order is coming. So the private sector is subject to a lot of these changes. And private sector and the way companies behave will change. The way governments and elected officials govern will change. I would even argue that the way citizens vote and consumers buy will also have to change. But let me start with the first of these few ideas, the public sector. I think that in the public sector, there's going to be a change of mindset on the part of many elected officials, particularly when it comes to socially driven investments in public spending. What do I mean by that? There will be increased levels of spending in everything having to do with people and people's welfare or quality of life, however you want to call it. Now, this doesn't necessarily only mean larger investments when it comes to healthcare related issues, such as, you know, building new hospitals or healthcare infrastructure, or perhaps giving greater access to preventive medicine, for example. I believe it's going to go beyond that. I believe that the definition of people's welfare is going to be a lot broader, and it's going to have to include things such as promoting better air quality, fighting pollution, creating more open and especially green spaces, parks and recreational areas in our cities and towns. It's going to mean more money for education, training, or even promoting climate justice, for example. So it's important to understand that the mind of the elected officials and governments, it's now changing dramatically fast. This is not a comment, and I want to clarify this because I'm trying to be objective here. This is not a comment tainted with my own particular view or even with an ideological bias in mind. Because at the end of the day, this can be done in many different ways, whether it's achieved through more progressive or conservative policies. The important thing is that it's going to have to be done. I just don't see a path forward for the very same type of cruel, unforgiving, and even brutal form of capitalism, which by the way, it's what has led us till here. It's what has led our economic growth for the last 50 years. So yes, the economic model would be based on a capitalist foundation, but it's gonna have to be more sustainable, more equitable, and a lot more just for not just a few, but for a lot more people. So talking about private sector, I think sort of the public sector, it's changing, and it's changing their approach to how they view investments in the public sector. But the private sector is also changing significantly. In what way? Well, for starters, the new economic reality for companies will rely even more on three pillars: innovation, technology, and sustainability. And why do I say that? I say that because it's what the market wants. I'll share with you the of a recent study that was published by Havas, one of the largest media conglomerates in the world, and they did a study about consumer behavior around the world in 37 countries. The findings were surprising to many. 92% of consumers, when given a choice and provided the conditions, well, the same conditions, I should say, of price and quality, when price and quality are the same and you give them a choice between a product that is responsible with the environment or service even, and one that is not, 92% is always going to choose the product or the service that has a positive impact on society. So I do think that the market is ready. It's what the market wants. And at the end of the day, companies are smart enough to understand that. But another interesting change when it comes to the private sector, it's going to be the clear, I would even venture to say, unstoppable trend towards a greater digital transformation of companies. Now, what I have in mind is that this is not a new trend, okay? I mean, let me be clear. I don't think something happened or technology was developed that allow us to now, after COVID-19, transform companies and digitalize entire sectors and industry. What has happened is that COVID-19 is accelerating the pace in a very significant way. It's speeding up technology adoption rates, and that's actually dramatically important. And whether we like it or not, one of the conclusions from this statement is that companies will have to invest or will want to invest more in technologies that allow them to depend less on low-skilled labor. It's unfortunate, but I'm afraid that's almost inevitable. This is going to be an opportunity, however, for artificial intelligence, for automation, for robotics, telemedicine, online education, cybersecurity, and a lot of other sort of strategic sectors in our economy that are heavily based on technology, because that's just a great opportunity. I also want to talk a little bit about supply chain relocation, or how the supply chains will change, because it's interesting, but organizations and companies are accelerating, they're speeding up or accelerating the way that supply chains are organized. I think that from now on, there's going to be a greater focus on leveraging local production capacity. That basically means that they're going to find local suppliers and find replacements for the ones that are not necessarily friendly. This means that companies are going to have to look for alternatives that are closer to home. I think most companies will want to have more choices. They'll want to be more flexible, agile, and sustainable supply chains will be a term that is going to be in vogue. It's going to be fashionable because companies will want to avoid future shortages. We saw what COVID-19 did to the world in terms of supplies. But this is important also for governments. And I think it's important for governments because for most governments, both in Europe and the United States, they would want to avoid that total dependence that we now have on a few markets, and particularly in China. And by the way, these markets are not necessarily the friendliest to them, both the United States and Europe at this moment. you know, in my own personal opinion, I just don't see Europe or the United States having to once again beg for gloves and surgical masks. To give an example, today, over 95% of all antibiotics sold in the United States are made in China, which again, it's not the most stable ally we have out there, but that's going to change. And as it changes, and as companies and governments look for alternatives, this is actually a great opportunity for Latin America vis-a-vis the United States and for Northern Africa when it comes to Europe. I don't think that Europe or the United States are going to be able to produce everything they need locally or even within the European region. And as they find alternatives, it makes sense for them to look at Northern Africa, and it makes sense for them to look at also Latin American countries. They offer cheap labor, and they offer proximity, which in a way it's a competitive advantage. So along those lines, in terms of what I wanted to share with you, this slide that you see in front of you basically raises a question. Are we heading towards a more equitable future? I think so. In my opinion, the most successful companies of tomorrow, for them, the benchmark will no longer just be short-term revenues. I think we are now facing a new business reality. And as that reality emerges, companies, you know, I'm not going to deny that, of course, and as it should be, they will continue to prioritize economic viability. They are going to continue to be looking for good, ample revenues and margins. But they will also have to take under consideration a more equitable approach to business. I'm convinced of that. I'm talking about what they call now the triple bottom line, the 3 Ps. Beyond profits, they have to think about people, and they have to think about planet. Again, the market is ready for it. Again, most companies understand it. So this slide, which is kind of funny, you know, to me, it's important because it shows how capitalism has been evolving. And a lot of people say, no, you know, capitalism is here to stay. Yes, it's here to stay. Oh, but you know, we haven't changed in 200 years. That's not true. We have changed, and we have been improving capitalism. That's what we're talking about here. Improve the current system and get rid of the things and parts that don't work. So the new model is based more on stakeholders and on the community or ecosystem that is built around the companies, and not just based on profits or shareholders. So this next slide that you see here is what actually makes me confident and optimistic about what I'm sharing with you. Before COVID-19, right? Markets, if you can go back one slide, but COVID-19, before COVID-19, most markets were already in a transition over to a sustainable economy. And for a lot of us, they were going slow, but we knew that it was an issue of speed, not direction. We knew that the economy was going to be a green economy, that it was going to be an emissions low economy. So I say that because this is not like something happened. The trend was there. Let me give you an example. BlackRock, which is the largest investment fund in the world. Now, BlackRock manages over $7 trillion worth of assets. The CEO, about 3 weeks before the COVID-19 erupted, went out there and announced his decision to stop investing in non-sustainable sectors. He actually, during the press conference, said that BlackRock would not only promote a transition over to a low-emission business model for their own assets and their own investments, but that they would go out of their way to actually, through their investments, accelerate that process. A few weeks later, and still before the COVID-19 exploded, several of the major funds in the world went out there also and followed BlackRock's lead. I think BlackRock's decision wasn't crazy. They did it because they understood they were losing a lot of money with old, obsolete business models that didn't make any sense in the 21st century. And I think that COVID has only accelerated that process, and that's actually something very important going forward. Another reason to be optimistic is the fact that Angela Merkel, for example, in Germany is pushing for a version of the new Green Deal, and not just for Germany, by the way, but also for the European Union. So in my opinion, whether it's Germany, France, most of the European, at least Northern European countries, or even in the South, Portugal, Spain, and Italy, all three countries have announced that they are supporting the European efforts for green reconstruction are news and messages that should make us confident. And by the way, if the Democrats win in November, this inevitable world trend, it's only going to be reinforced. And so again, that's what leads me to be so optimistic about this. Let me go to the next slide. The terrible crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, should be a great opportunity for the world. That's my statement, and that's what I think should be the takeaway lesson from my talk today. I want to talk to you about the economic recovery plans around the world. And I want to talk to you about them because they represent an incredible opportunity to build a more prosperous world, a more sustainable world, and to do it for more people. This is an opportunity to start doing things better. And as I mentioned before, for us to actually even fix many of the problems we had with the old system. Within the next few, we're going to have to invest trillions of dollars in ambitious stimulus economic plans and fiscal and financial incentives. And the IFC is working very hard to do this. But even national governments will continue to work very hard to offer reconstruction plans and to lead the efforts to get the economy back and running. That's the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. That is the great opportunity to make sure that in doing so, we also embrace more sustainable practices. Now, if we're going to give away billions of dollars to strategic sectors of our economies around the world, and we're going to have to do that, whether we like it or not. We did it during the last world crisis. We're going to have to do it. Let's do it right. Whether it's the construction industry or the tourism industry, I don't care. But let's make sure that we put in place a number of conditions on these public funds. Why not ask these companies that are getting public money that in exchange for the funds, they at the very least implement plans to reduce carbon emissions, for example, that they improve energy efficiency levels, that they transition to cleaner technologies. Why not? It is the right thing to do. So if we're going to subsidize entire sectors like we have in the past, let's be careful about who gets that money and under what conditions. Let's think about the great opportunity that we now have to help those businesses that give back more to society. Let's think about which ones are the ones that act more sustainably, and why not? Let's also think about which companies improve the general well-being of more citizens, or even which ones have a greater positive impact on the planet. So at the end of the day, from this crisis, we will have winners and losers. It always happens, and this is no exception. I happen to think that those companies, those institutions, those entrepreneurs, and even those governments that realign their strategies and become more flexible, but also extremely more sustainable, will be those that come out the strongest after this pandemic. So let me conclude with two thoughts that I think are extremely important to wrap it up. The Green New Deal is a great idea, and because its time has come. There is no other alternative. The world has ignored for far too long that this great climate emergency is coming. And guess what? It's now upon us. We have to be able to act now. I think these are unique times, and we are being witness to what to me is extremely optimistic and unprecedented civil society global movement that is flourishing like a pandemic throughout the world. This is being driven by a younger generation that demand a different kind of world order, a different kind of capitalism. They demand a more sustainable world and a more sustainable world order and world economy. A new generation that is demanding of us that, as Carlos said at the beginning, that we hit the reset button, that we press Ctrl+Alt+Delete and start over, that we start over to finally do what's right, what makes ethical and moral sense, but also what makes economic sense. Here's my final thought. When everything comes back to whatever, some degree of normality, whatever that might look. I don't know if it's going to be in a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever that might look like. Let's work together to start building tomorrow's world, but we have to do it today. And you know what? The Green Deal is the right thing to do, because if we want to build a more competitive, a more dynamic world order, a more equitable economy, we have to do it. We have to bet on a new Green Deal. It's the right thing to do, but also we owe it to our kids. We owe it to the next generations. Let's get it done. This is the opportunity we were looking for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. It has been a very interesting and insightful presentation indeed. You have mentioned essential points that we should focus on to boost the green recovery. So now I will start with a couple of questions, and I will remind the audience to continue posting their questions in the Q&A chat, please. So one of the points that you mentioned, Juan, is that we must listen to science. So we would like to hear your opinion on the responses taken by governments to control COVID-19. Do you consider similar measures should be taken to tackle climate change?
Absolutely. You know, I talked a little bit about science and how, what a big difference is making, how big data and understanding and analyzing data has given us a comparative advantage in fighting COVID-19. We're being able to not just share data, but that's actually allowing us to work together on a long-awaited vaccine, and even for us to share information on the proper treatments against COVID-19. I have worked on 14 political campaigns in my life. And I think COVID-19, once and for all, has been a disruptive force for governments, and particularly for elected officials, because up until now, an elected official or government official could make decisions basically based on their inspiration that day, or perhaps their limited knowledge of the complex subject that they had to decide on. That world is over. I think that new elected officials are going to have to be at least prepared to understand complex issues, to understand data, and to listen to people that know a lot more than they do. They will have to apply their interpretation, they have to apply their knowledge and their acute political wisdom when making decisions. But that wisdom, that interpretation will be based on numbers and data. And I think that's the major difference. But that's good. That's exactly what we need. We need elected officials that are a lot more willing to listen to scientists, and that are a lot more willing to understand that they don't know everything, that the world is only getting more complex, getting more difficult. And it's okay to say, I don't know, but let me find the people that actually know more than I do. That's the right thing to do.
Indeed. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to pass over the word to Marcela Ponce, who is going to read the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniela, and thank you, Juan, for a very good presentation. I have a number of questions from the audience. If I may start with a question from Mahesh. Do you see, Juan, that there will be a lower focus now, quarterly or annual shareholder returns, dividend, and buybacks from companies? Is this the end of the US-centric capitalistic economy model?
You know, I talked briefly about this and I touched upon it. I don't think that capitalism as we know it, it's over. The new way of doing things, it's going to be different. Short-term thinking, short-term returns will no longer only be the one and only priority for shareholders, for CEOs, and executives at the top companies. And the example I want to share with you is, how well the stock market is performing, right? A lot of people say we're going through the worst economic crisis we have seen probably in history, at the very least, going back to the Great Depression of the 1920s. How in the world is it that the stock market is doing so well? It's actually doing well because there aren't that many other options for investors at this moment. And that is the one place where you can actually think long term. And they are perfectly okay with putting their money, understanding that there is no short-term return on investment tomorrow or during the next quarter. It's going to take a while. And yet investors have shown that they're okay with it. So absolutely, I think this is a new day. I don't think it's the end of short-term thinking, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think in the next year, 2-3 years, it will be the trend and it will be here to stay. Companies, again, they are in business to make money. They are in business to have profits. I'm not saying they shouldn't have profits, but I also think that part of the problem and how the economy got here had everything to do with that short-sighting or short-sight vision of the world. So if there's anything good out of this, that's definitely one of the good lessons.
Thank you, Juan. And just building on that, you also mentioned some major funds in the world following BlackRock's model. And so a follow-up question on that would be, how do you think that climate risk assessment is going to play a role in that new model for investors?
Oh, that is a very good question, because for companies and private equity funds and investment funds to be able to make sense and understand the viability of a project, they will no longer only look at the business plan and look at the P&L or just basic bottom line numbers. They're going to have to understand how that company is exposed to greater risk. And that means understanding climate change. I don't think any insurance company can no longer have the luxury of not understanding the science, of not understanding how climate change will impact their own investments and their own policies. That's an example, but it's completely applicable to investment funds. It's completely applicable to investors because they will no longer only be interested in whether that investment is going to give me a quick return on investment and it's going to give me a lot of money overnight. If the risk I'm taking also means a loss of confidence on the part of the consumer, if it means that companies, might be making money, but the reputation is going to suffer, most investors will not want to be associated to that investment. And so there is a whole new spectrum of aspects of traditional investment. It's not just numbers, and that's not just dollars and cents. It's now about reputation. It's about risk management. It's about long-term thinking. And as I mentioned before, it's understanding how that company and the products it manufactures or produces or offers coexist in that network of companies around.
Thank you, Juan. And following on that as well, and you talk about producers, you also talked about relocation, supply chains. So how important, and this is a question from Eloise Patrina, how important do you think is for governments to apply a carbon tax so the local producers get advantage on price over those producers who have cheaper labor force?
That's a very good question. I would say the following. First of all, when you look at the case of Latin America, for example, there are a number of free trade agreements in place already between the United States and a number of countries, whether it's El Salvador, Colombia, Peru, the free trade agreements that, in my opinion, have not been utilized to the fullest. I think this new reality, it's a tremendous opportunity for these countries to actually strengthen their bilateral economic and trade relationships, because a lot of the companies in the United States are going to look south. They're going to look south because they're going to be looking for cheaper labor, number one, and number two, because it's so much closer to have part of your production in Central America or even in Mexico than it is in China, for example, or in some Asian countries. So although the labor might be cheaper in Asia, at the end of the day, your competitive advantage is there because the incentives from the governments are going to be huge for companies to relocate closer to home, and particularly in countries that are more stable. So carbon paying as for what you pollute, it's important. And it should not be an issue of the United States that applies only to the national laws and whether the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, is strong or not. I think that as we continue to integrate from, you know, and by that I mean North America, Central America, or whether we're talking about a free trade agreement between the United States and Europe that, you know, might once again be an issue in the future, particularly if the Democrats win the White House. It's going to be extremely important to not just think of trade in the same manner we used to think about trade, which was, where do I find the best way or the best place to produce cheaper? It's all about, how do I produce cheaper and more responsibly, regardless of where I am? So yes, labor will be a factor, but it can no longer be the only factor. Even if I'm producing in Mexico, as an American-based company, I have to do it responsibly, because the laws should be across borders. The laws that regulate whether you pay for polluting or not. So companies are not going to want to move there because they're not going to be polluting, or because they're going to get away with polluting. They're going to move there because it makes sense for them to be more competitive in those countries.
Absolutely right, I think, Juan. I completely agree with you. And if I just may add just one line to that, to the person that asked that question, is that 60 countries in the world currently have carbon tax initiatives. So that's a good sign. We just need for those initiatives to be completely executed and implemented around the world. But I think that that's the trend. We have another question, and I'm going to try to squeeze in as many as I can because they're all very good. This is a question from our next speaker for the next webinar, Jose Ordovaz. He says, thanks, Juan. This is a really optimistic talk. With regard to the climate change, we have seen an improvement of the atmosphere during COVID. However, to fulfill the 2025 Paris Treaty, we should continue with the same restrictions until 2030. How do we do it?
I actually disagree. I don't think we should have the same restrictions. I think, my dear friend, we have to be a lot more aggressive, ambitious, and have more restrictions, not less, and definitely not the same. How do we do it? We do it by understanding that it makes economic sense. When you bet on the Green Deal, for example, when you bet on sustainability as the driving economic engine of your economy, you have to invest in science, you have to invest in patents, you have to invest in technology. The types of jobs that are generated in this new economic model are better jobs, are not the kinds of jobs that are going to move to China or to India tomorrow because the cost of labor is 2 cents cheaper than in your country. The types of jobs that are generated require continuous training and education. They pay higher salaries, and they're not as vulnerable as traditional low-skilled jobs. So no matter how you look at it, if you begin to understand the true meaning of a sustainable economy, you're actually saving money, you're making money. President Obama has a wonderful quote. He says, the moment companies and governments understand that it's a lot better to make a lot of money over a long period of time than to make a lot of money over a short period of time, sustainability begins to make sense. And I agree with that. So we have to understand that this is an opportunity, because we're going to be better prepared, more resilient, because it's an opportunity to kill 2 birds at once. Yes, we're taking care of the pandemic. We're recovering our economic stability and creating jobs and creating economic activity. But let's do it right. At the same time, let's bet on technology. Let's find those investments that make sense in the long term, that make our society better, more equitable, and above all, fair for a lot more people than just a few.
Thank you, Juan. That's also very much in line with our previous webinar, Invest in Science and Invest in Investigation Research. So very good. I'm going to just make the last question. We have many questions, all very interesting, but I think we're reaching the end of the webinar. So Juan, last question, and I think this is to inspire all the audience here. So we are all citizens of the world facing the climate change challenge. And people connected to this webinar are interested to know your thoughts about what they can do as businesses or individuals to mitigate climate change. So do you have any advices on how people contribute personally to address the reality of climate change?
Thank you for the last question. And let me be bold about this. And, you know, my answer might be a little bit not well received by some, but I truly believe this. Way too late for us individuals to just think that our own behavior and consumer choices will make a difference. You know, I have an electric car, but the great majority, 99.9% of the people out there don't, right? So I eat responsibly, and I happen to be a vegetarian, but I think I do it out of principle and out of values, but I'm not making a difference. I'm not making a difference. There's only two things that we can do as individuals to make a profound difference. And that is understanding that we need to purchase and vote better. So let me tell you what I mean by that. Purchase better. At the end of the day, when we go to the supermarket, when we go to a restaurant, when we ask someone to provide a service for us, let's be responsible and let's understand what companies are being part of the solution and not part of the problem. Let's understand how my money is going to have either a negative or a positive impact in how companies behave going forward, because that has a significantly greater impact than my own personal decision as to how I act and what type of consumer I am. And number two, perhaps as if not more important, how we vote. Let's make sure that we vote for people that understand climate change and want to actually do something about it. If not, it is our responsibility and it is, I think, our fault. And we shouldn't be complaining. We have to understand that the most effective way to change the world is through our vote and our decision to buy and what to buy.
Thank you so much, Juan. I think I'm just going to return the word to Daniela for the closing remarks. We are very close to the end time. I think that we are going to try. There are so many questions that we are going to pass on to you, Juan, because I think they're very interesting. And maybe we can try to send some ideas over the email as well. Thank you so much.
Pleasure for me to respond to some of those questions that were not answered.
So thank you very much, Juan. To round up this webinar, I'm going to mention some of the key messages that you gave us. So we need to apply the lessons learned during the crisis caused by the COVID-19. We must listen to scientists. With climate change, we can't close our borders to do not get affected. And finally, we need to start acting and to cooperate to rebuild a more dynamic and resilient society. This is with the objective to achieve a more competitive and sustainable economy focused on stakeholders rather than in profit. So let's bet on the grid recovery. Let's bet on the new Green Deal. And thank you so much for taking the time to give us this webinar. I think we all found it very, very insightful and useful.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed this time with everyone, and thank you so much for organizing these talks. They're extremely interesting.
Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you very much, Juan, for another inspirational speech from you. I think that it has been very interesting, and you have asked all of us to become agents of change. I would like to share some announcements before we close, and this is that we are going to send an email to all participants tomorrow in which we will include a link for the video recording of this webinar and also a registration for the next webinar that we are going to host on June 17th. And this will be about tourism and sustainability in the new normal. We will be introducing Manuel Butler, who is the Executive Director for the World Tourism Organization, and we will find out if we can go for summer vacation or not in the current situation. No? I want to thank everyone, my team, my colleagues, Daniela, Marcela Ponce, who is the Climate Finance Lead for Latin America in our team, and of course, Juan and the audience for being there. Thank you so much and looking forward to the next webinar.
Thank you.